The Woman in the Woods. I don't really know how to start this, but I guess I'll just tell it like it happened. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or anything like that, but what I saw that night changed everything for me. It's something I'll never forget, and I still can't explain it. It was last fall, and I was visiting my cousin who lives out in the country. He's got this old cabin deep in the woods, and he had been inviting me out there for years. I finally took him up on it, thinking it would be a nice getaway from the city. I was wrong. The first couple of days were great. The cabin was cozy, the air was crisp, and the woods were beautiful. We spent our days hiking, fishing, and just enjoying the peace and quiet. At night, we'd sit by the fire, drinking and telling stories. It was exactly what I needed. But then, on the third night, things started to get weird. We had stayed up late, drinking more than we probably should have. My cousin went to bed around midnight, but I wasn't tired yet, so I decided to stay up a little longer. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, when I heard it. A soft, distant sound, like someone crying. At first, I thought it was just the wind or an animal, but the sound kept getting louder, closer. It was definitely a woman crying, and it was coming from the woods. I got up and looked out the window, but it was too dark to see anything. The sound was really unsettling, but I figured it must be someone lost out there, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The crying was coming from deep in the woods, and as I walked towards it, I started to get this weird feeling like I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The crying got louder, and it was starting to freak me out. It didn't sound right. There was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I was about to turn back when I saw her. She was standing in a small clearing, her back to me. She was wearing a long white dress, and her hair was dark and tangled. She was the source of the crying, and she just stood there, sobbing quietly. I called out to her, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. She just kept crying, like she didn't even hear me. I should have turned around and gone back to the cabin, but I didn't. Something about her drew me in, and I found myself walking towards her, even though every instinct was telling me to run. I got closer, and that's when I noticed something strange. She wasn't casting a shadow. The moon was out, bright enough that I should have seen it, but there was nothing. Just her, standing there in the moonlight, like she wasn't even real. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't move. It was like I was frozen, stuck in place. The woman slowly turned around, and I felt my blood run cold. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were hollow, empty. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring right at me with this look of pure sadness. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear. She took a step towards me, and that's when I finally snapped out of it. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the cabin. I didn't stop until I was inside, with the door locked behind me. My cousin was still asleep, and I didn't want to wake him, so I just sat there, shaking, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen a ghost. But I knew what I saw. I could still hear her crying, even though I was back inside. I tried to block it out, but it wouldn't stop. It was like it was inside my head, echoing over and over. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there waiting for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I told my cousin what happened. He got real quiet and said he'd heard the crying before, too. He said there was an old story about a woman who had died in those woods years ago. Some kind of tragedy, but he didn't know the details. He said locals talked about seeing her ghost, but he never believed it. Until now. We packed up and left that day. I haven't been back to the cabin since, and I don't think I ever will. I still hear her sometimes in my dreams, that crying, that awful crying. It's something I'll never forget. I don't know what she wanted, but I hope I never find out.